Dr. Ahmed Saigh from Bahrain, Dr. Adana Isa from Kuwait, and Dr. Faisal Shatti. If you can join to the stage, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. My name is Ahmed Darmaki. I'm from Oman. This is a brief introduction, and I'll take you back from the obese patients to the malnourished patients again. So again, a case of Crohn's disease. I'm happy to have my colleagues sharing with me this session, and I promise it will be a quick one. So this is a case of Crohn's disease. The background of this patient is a 43-year-old man who was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, A2, B2, and L3. This gentleman was diagnosed with Kimura syndrome or Kimura disease at the age of 25. And it is essentially a painless progressive cervical lymphadenopathy with eosinophilia, which he struggled with for around 7 years until he got diagnosed. And he received many things, including cyclophosphamide and steroids that didn't work. But then what worked is removal of those big lymph nodes in his mandibular region. So 9 years or 10 years after that, he started having gradual onset GI symptoms: diarrhea, non-bloody, abdominal fullness and discomfort, weight loss, recurrent mouth ulcers. He's an excess smoker. He doesn't have any family history of inflammatory bowel disease and no extraintestinal manifestations. His initial workup in the local hospital where he was seen initially in 2019 showed an elevated CRP of 17, albumin of 30, hemoglobin was normal, platelets were a bit highish, and he didn't have any stool pathogens. He had an endoscopy at that time. Upper GI endoscopy was normal. Lower GI endoscopy showed terminal ileal ulcerations with edema and luminal narrowing. His colon showed also patchy scattered erythema. He didn't have much of ulcers or severe disease on colonoscopy. And histopathology showed chronic active granulomatous ileitis with ulceration. So Crohn's disease with granuloma. He had mycobacterial TB PCR, which came back as negative, and he had quantiferon test, which was as well negative. Immediately, the gastroenterologist who saw him in that hospital get a CT as well during the same time, which showed 2 short stenotic segments in proximal ileum. And there was a narrowing, mural stratification, hyperenhancement. There was also a dilatation in the distal jejunal loops. And he had mesenteric border opposition in keeping with enteroenteric adhesions. No fistulas, and there was also wall thickness in a long segment of the distal ileum up to the ileocecal valve. So we will start with a voting question. If you can vote, you can scan the code there and let us get your opinion before we move to our panel. There is almost a consensus. Okay. All right, so that's healthy. We have different opinions here, but mostly for anti-TNF. Somebody would start IL-23, IL-12. Maybe we can ask our panel as well what they will do in such a scenario.
Yeah, that's
working.
Right. Okay. So given the presentation, this is a new patient diagnosed with Crohn's disease, involvement of his small bowel. He does have multiple strictures, I take it, or narrowings with the short segments. I do agree with anti-TNF, especially that we do have evidence with adalimumab, with the Strident trial. So that's an option for him. I don't think they're wrong if they start sticking him up, but definitely anti-TNF I would go for.
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's I think it's too early for surgery. He has 2 short strictures. Okay, they may seem to be inflammatory. We could discuss it with the radiologist and see. There's nothing long. Even the jejunal dilatation is minimal. So I think, yeah, it's too early for surgery, strictureplasty or anything. I think the first step here is biologics. Since you have a fistula, maybe anti-TNFs will be slightly better than...
There is no fistula.
There's no fistula, okay. So again, it's between anti-TNF and ustekinumab, I think both will be correct here.
Thanks, Dr. Faisal. Dr. Ahmed, would the pre-stenotic dilatation in the distal jejunal loops will make you change your mind?
No, I think it's making us to think more about the biologic to start early, because having a multiple small bowel involvement, and there is no, like, I mean, even the symptom and the dilatation, there is no obstruction signs for now.
Apart
so we
from
can
discomfort.
start the biologic and we'll go there.
I think just one more question about his initial disease, this Kimura or whatever syndrome.
Kimura.
Is it because, you know, with anti-TNF there's a risk of lymphoma? Is it associated? Should we
Yeah,
take
so
care
it's
or no?
not lymphoma. It's a benign progressive lymph nodes. They usually have eosinophilia. There are few only reports of a concurrent IBD with that. So it's not really a risk factor for IBD, and not really a manifestation of IBD. But it's always difficult to say that. IBD, like TB, especially Crohn's, can present like anything. So whether that eosinophilia and lymphadenitis is related to an ongoing systemic process, nobody would know. But there were no granulomas in those lymph nodes. So let's move on. Now, speaking about those strictures in the ileum, the thing which we need to always think of when deciding about what to do with strictures is to study if the stenosis is inflammatory or fibrotic. Also assess if the patient is symptomatic or not. If there are associated conditions like phlegmon, penetrating disease, abscesses like the patient which Dr. Abdullah presented, and if there are contraindication to medical therapies, and if there is contraindication to endoscopic therapy. So essentially this says that you have to think of your case, probably discuss in an MDT meeting as well, and start medical therapy if no contraindication. Now, this is again another voting questions for the audience. What modality can predict degree of fibrosis in fibrostenotic Crohn's disease? Ultrasound, okay. Somebody is saying ultrasound, and we should respect that. So I think there is one missing option in this, which is none. So according to the statements of the global consensus for definition, diagnosis, and management of fibrostenotic small bowel disease from the STAR consortium, and this is last year, they clearly mentioned that fibrostenotic Crohn's disease on CT, MRI, and intestinal ultrasound is defined by luminal narrowing, pre-stenotic dilatation, and wall thickness. However, the inability to pass the scope also is required to diagnose that. And currently, none of the cross-sectional images which we have is really able to accurately determine the degree of fibrosis in fibrostenotic Crohn's disease. However, there are some features on MRI that can tell you that this is more of a fibrotic rather than inflammatory, or the component fibrotic is more, including decreased T2 mural signal intensity and mesenteric fat proliferation and prestenotic dilatation. So let's continue with the case for the sake of time. This patient was initially started on oral prednisolone. He didn't continue probably due to the side effects. He was fine after that, no much of obstructive symptoms. And following month, he was seen and started on infliximab, 5 milligram per kilogram with azathioprine. So back to our panel here. Would you start a higher dose, or you will keep it like 5 milligram per kilogram?
I don't think we need a higher dose here, to be honest. I mean, his labs seem to be fine, symptoms seem to be fine, imaging is not that bad. And he does not have any further complications around, apart from the two stenotic areas which are really short. So, to be honest, I don't think we need to go higher dose. And he's managed more or less like an outpatient setting, right? So.
Okay. So any other thoughts?
I agree with them.
Okay, pretty much consensus on this, and this is what most of us will do. However, he came 4 months later to the clinic for review, and he was cachectic, he had lost weight, he had abdominal distension, he was having obstructive symptoms, but he was passing bowel movement. He had also back pain, and on examination, his bowel loops could be palpated. Actually, you could see them. So he was admitted with small bowel obstruction and malnutrition due to significant weight loss. And at that time, he had a normal hemoglobin and a CRP of 9.4, so that wasn't really much high. The CT showed a massive dilatation of the small bowel loops with air fluid levels and transition point to the mid-distal ileum. And this is his CT. You can see the air fluid level. You can see also the inflammation in the ileal loops. Probably the transition zone is not easy to identify on this. There is fecalization as well. So he was admitted with acute obstruction. He was taken for surgery. He had laparoscopic, which was converted to open ileocecectomy. And there was a segment of mild stricture in the jejunum that the surgeons commented on, and they left it alone. They went for the ileum 1. And after that, the patient had a very stormy course, complicated admission in the ICU after anastomotic leak and hemorrhage. He had another surgery to remove a gangrenous anastomosis, and he ended up with end ileostomy. Had a tracheostomy in the ICU, pneumothorax, had segmental PE, received anticoagulation for around 6 months. Histopathology from this surgical specimen showed chronic inflammation in keeping with Crohn's, along with intussusception. So we will do our third question now, and before moving to the panel, how you will manage this patient in 2025. That was 2019 when we saw the patient at that time. And again, that patient received around 3 months or 4 months of infliximab, so close to the induction phase. All right, so I think you guys were affected by what has been said in Dr. Abdelilah's presentation. So nobody is choosing anti-integrins, but most of the things to switch therapy. Would you switch at this stage?
Before you would switch, was he optimized on infliximab? Did we get a TDM? Was it adequate?
Yeah, so no levels were done at that time. He came after actually the 4th dose, and he was obstructed.
Just one more question. I mean, I don't know what was the situation at that time, but why was he rushed to surgery? Could they have given him conservative for a while, NG suction, wait for a while until things open up?
Yeah, he did
Because-
not open up, and it
didn't.
seems
Okay.
because it was complicated by intussusception
Right.
that he he did not really improve, and his obstruction was sort of a subacute. That's why his abdomen was distended,
And-
quite significantly distended.
And the other thing is that he had this obstruction not because of the strictures, because of the intussusception, which is another.
Both. It will be
both, huh?
difficult to say.
Okay.
According to the CT, it's due to the strictures. The intussusception is only a histopathological finding after the surgery. Okay, so Jackie's, somebody will go for Jackie's as well. So we did it different way. We that time, patient was seen 4 months post-op. He stayed in the hospital for around 3 months. And when he was seen, he was already recovering, improving. His weight has improved to 50 kilograms from 29 kilograms during his admission. He was asymptomatic. Stoma output was 5 to 6 times. CRP was 36, and hemoglobin was normal. So infliximab was resumed. And colonoscopy was obtained and showed the diversion colitis and a single aphthous ulcer examined in the examined 20 centimeters of the ileum through the stoma. CT enterography was done and showed active inflammation involving a long segment of the distal jejunum and proximal ileal loops with proximal dilated loops and fecalization. And there was no evidence of obstruction. But still there is some dilatation. Infliximab level was 0.3 with like some time after resuming infliximab, and the dose was optimized, and we improved the infliximab level to 9.7 with no antibodies. Patients was generally improving in terms of symptoms, but he was reporting some recurrence of symptoms by the end of infliximab cycle. Reassessment after that, like few months later, MRE showed still diffuse ileum thickening and active disease. So at that point, infliximab level was at almost 10 and no antibodies, and the patient was still having high CRP. So he was switched to ustekinumab and reassessed sometime later. So let's talk about the switch to ustekinumab to the panel. Would you do something different at this stage? We didn't have Jackie's at that time. Tofacitinib was not approved for Crohn's disease, or is still not approved for Crohn's disease.
Just a question. He didn't started immunosuppressant with
He was.
infliximab.
He was on infliximab and azathioprine.
And azathioprine. I think it's an option to have Stelara in his case. Yeah. So we don't have a JAK. So and that time I don't think the IL-23 was available for Crohn's disease. So Stelara will be the option.
So ustekinumab will be the most straightforward option, which is available with our limited options. But the patient was having still high CRP, reaching up to 103, with increased stoma output, intermittent fevers, and mild abdominal pain. In fact, on ustekinumab, he wasn't really doing well. So we have to move to another agent, whether we go to another anti-TNF or just give a shot to vedolizumab. We move to vedolizumab. With vedolizumab, some of his symptoms improved. His CRP did not improve though, and reassessment, and this is around 8 months of vedolizumab showed MRE showed long distal genural and proximal ileal segments of active disease with luminal narrowing and proximal circulation. So pretty much still active disease with same pre-stenotic dilatation, and the only thing that his weight was stable, abdominal discomfort was still there. The stoma output was increasing only in the last month of vedolizumab. So we optimized the vedolizumab to 4 weeks. Surgeons were seeing him regularly, and they were advising against reversal of stoma, which is wise at that stage. So this is a patient who has failed infliximab, ustekinumab, vedolizumab, a little bit of improvement despite 4 weekly. Still, CRP is quite high. Calprotectin was not also coming down, and mild symptoms were there. So where to go? This is the medical therapies which are thought to be appropriate by the consensus of fibrostenotic Crohn's disease management. Mainly, it's like anti-TNF along with immunomodulators and ustekinumab. The data on other agents are still post hoc analysis data, so it was not available with good results that it can be adopted in a guideline. But there are post hoc analysis for risankizumab and upadacitinib that shows that they give also good results. Obviously, endoscopic balloon dilatation and surgery are among the appropriate therapies for this. Probably heard about this yesterday, so I wouldn't go much about it. Creole study, which was a study on adalimumab for patients with symptomatic strictures. And in this study, they found that people who have more than one prognostic factors, they have more successful treatment with adalimumab. The only thing about the study that 50% of patients who improved, they actually required surgery during follow-up. So the question was whether the anti-TNF did improve or it just delayed the inevitable. Again, another study which was mentioned by Dr. Dana, Strident study. It's an Australian study, RCT, open label, and a single center using a high dose of adalimumab, 160 for 4 weeks, then a regular dose of 40 milligram every 2 weeks. As opposed to the standard induction. And if you can see, there was no difference. The only difference is MRI findings. And this also raised some question about how reliable is the MRI finding alone in assessment of patient response. So the other things which we didn't talk or we did not discuss in our patient is whether those strictures will go for endoscopic dilatation or will need resection stricturoblasty. The things which will favor endoscopic dilatation is if it is an anastomotic stricture, short stricture less than 5, long interval to previous surgery dilatation, and intermittent obstructive symptoms, limited pre-stenotic dilatation. The factors which will favor the stricturoplasty resection approach is dilatation when it is technically difficult, long or multiple strictures, early recurrence with dilatation, abscesses, fistulas, and other complications, dysplasia and malignancy as well, or long-standing or significant pre-stenotic dilatation. So back to our case, this patient was started or was switched to upadacitinib. We thought about other options as well, including subcutaneous infliximab or risankizumab. Initially, when he started on UPA, he started complaining of fever, sore throat. So the patient stopped for around 4 months. We managed to convince him to come back on UPA, which he started using appropriately, and he only restarted after worsening of disease. His weight came down to 29 kilograms. Fecal calprotectin was 300. CRP was 65. Albumin was 27. And after starting upadacitinib, 4 months later, patient became asymptomatic, He gained weight again from 29 to 44. His fecal calprotectin came down normally to 41. Hemoglobin was stable, platelets were normal, CRP was 4, and albumin is 36. So he had really improved quite significantly on monotherapy with upadacitinib, and he does still have the strictures, which we will need to figure out whether he will need a structuroplasty or surgical resection once his disease is completely controlled. So with this, I'll conclude my slides. Thank you.
Dr. Ahmed, I have one question from the moderator.
Oh, Dr. Ahmed.
So if the patient have no clinical symptom for stricture, do you still recommend to go with any therapy, endotherapy or surgical therapy, without any clinical symptoms?
So that is a very good question. At the beginning, we should not go only by symptoms. Symptoms are really poor in assessing patients with stricture specifically. So if those patients have radiological findings of pre-stenotic dilatation, those are patients who will definitely develop symptoms, may develop complications. We need to be proactive in terms of trying therapies. So we still treat patients even if they are asymptomatic. The symptoms would give us probably a window of trialing therapy instead of going to surgery. But if they are symptomatic, then the window will be really narrow and you might need to take them early for surgery.
Ahmed, excellent case. I always think of, it depends upon the year you say. UPA is an excellent medication. I was wondering about, we were discussing with Sebastian, and what we were saying off-label, we are doing a lot of shortening of ustekinumab and shortening of VDU. He didn't agree, but we don't have option. So the question is combination therapy, VDU with ustekinumab, VDU with anti-TNF in the era if you don't have UPA.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think a lot of us now doing combination biologic therapy, off-label. Obviously, it is really off-label. It should be used with caution, proper discussion with the patient regarding benefits, risks. But it is always, it has been shown on series and the studies which were already carried out that it's quite safe for most of the time. So if the patient didn't respond initially to different lines of therapies, combination therapy is the way to go. But I think we should probably try a single powerful therapy before we go to a different. Probably I would require the patient to be failing 3 therapies before I think of combination therapy. It's quite expensive. It might not be approved by many hospitals, and there is many issues regarding the ability to use that. So I would definitely try monotherapy first, and if a patient did not improve, I would go to combination biologic therapies. Okay, so I'll just repeat what Dr. Sebastian says, that combination therapy might be possible, but don't combine anti-TNF and JAK inhibitor. That is usually not useful and might be result in side effects. And the combination therapy, it depends on the benefits and also the risks for the patient. But Dr. Sebastian doesn't think combination therapy is useful in Crohn's disease. Unfortunately, we are sometimes forced to go for some medical therapy, especially for inflammatory disease patients, where you will not go for really surgery, or patient does not want surgery. So you will definitely try some combination therapies. Ustekinumab and anti-TNF, or ustekinumab and vedolizumab could be tried. It has been, tried in some patients, and it worked. But I think everybody has their own different experience.
I think our pediatric colleagues are waiting now, so I think we'll conclude this session. They've been waiting patiently for a long time here. and we're already